Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stream. Another beautiful stream for us today, as always. It's Friday, it's 5 p.m. And for those of you who are new to the stream, of course, we have our first 10 minutes or so of just me rambling, let you guys all catch up. Today, we have a guest, so I might limit my ramblings. We have Paul, who some of you may be familiar with from my stream with Artie, which was last week. Time is hard. Paul, hi. Introduce yourself. Say hello. Do whatever you want. It's free country.
Hi, everyone. I am Paul. I think the only way, if you haven't seen me on that stream we did with Artie, the only other way you would know me is that guy who writes really, 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 really long comments on YouTube videos trying to explain why sovereign citizens and specifically broken system, broken trust are wrong.
It's true. They are amazing. They remind me of a younger, more youthful, vital self before I realized that some people are not here to be changed or corrected or informed. You'll get.
I will
there,
take
maybe.
pride in the fact that I got him to admit that it's reasonable for states to require driver's licenses in the first place.
Well, there. See, you're doing better than me. I gave up on that a couple years ago. it was a long trek to the point where I'm like, no. But it's good that you inspire me to be a little more friendly towards the hard opposition. Of course, anyone that's sort of like, I don't know, I'm still very much like, oh, I'll help you out. But when you go, just repeating myself now, when you come to me and you go, oh, listen here, bootlicker, you're a terrorist, I'm probably just going to be like, that's a neat opinion. Okay, no. So anyway, a lot of course, with our boy Delete Lawz, there's just a constant stream of just nonsense coming out at all times. So we're going to try to rein, I was going to say ourselves. It's going to be mostly me because, tangents. We're going to rein ourselves into some of the court stuff that our boy Jose has filed in regards to, we have the Replevin Act, and then there's also a civil thing that he filed that maybe we want to go over. It's very short. It's very thin, if that applies. But Paul here, of course, is a lot more familiar with how all the court stuff works, where I'm much more familiar with torture cuffs and dungeons.
Yes, for those of you who don't know, I am an attorney in Ohio, and I work for a prosecutor's office there.
And yet people still come to him and say he doesn't understand how law works. I saw it happen once. It was confusing. But I don't know. You want to just jump right into this, and people can catch up as they go along?
Yeah, I think once they discover the veritable treasure trove of content that Mr. DeCastro has created, they will either go down the rabbit hole or be scared away by the amount of content.
Fantastic. All right, where do we want to begin? We have his request for the phone. Is that where we wanted to start, or
we could do immediately post-arrest, where he called the FBI and the Ohio Attorney General and the ACLU and the Civil Liberties Commission and the state senator and the state representative. And
true. Oh, it was so bad. What do you got? What do you got about that? What are your thoughts on how successful his calls will be?
Well, he, to my knowledge, was released from jail on a bail that somebody else put up for him at maybe like 8 o'clock Eastern time, which Ohio is Eastern time. And so he made all of these call attempts. And of course, the AG is not going to be in the office. The state representative, the state senator are not going to be in the office. He did leave messages, and I don't know if he's gotten calls back, but he really just cast literally as wide a net as you possibly could trying to report these. And like the FBI referred him to the Attorney General. I don't think he got through to any actual attorney's offices because, again, it's 8 o'clock at night.
But haven't you heard that the people own the businesses and they're not allowed to close when the people want to use them? Isn't that that's how that works, right?
100%.
Yeah. There's someone in my comment section who cannot be convinced otherwise, and it's kind of great. But yeah, the FBI feels a lot like our boy One Stop 14th Amendment shop. who also called the FBI because he illegally parked and was mad that he got towed. It's not an FBI issue.
I
I'm
mean,
sure they were very upset that they waited that long to figure out what he was talking about.
some of us may have heard the argument that Chili made to Team Skeptic, where he was like, "We own the police cars; they're
Yeah.
ours."
Yep. No.
Which, if you're looking at it in one of the most abstract senses possible, sure, they belong to an agency that is employed and run under state governments performing a service to the public. But if you really feel that way, go hop behind the wheel of a police car and see where that gets you. And for the people who say that all public buildings should be open all the time to everyone, go kick your feet up on a couch in the White House and see how that goes.
Yeah. What's the U.S. Versus Coquinda? I know, briefly touch on that, but it's Greensboro Civic Associations versus USPS, I think, might be one of the cases from the Supreme Court. Not that I'm not trying to like throw cases at you. I don't expect you to know every case that I've read through and vaguely understood, I'm sure. But basically it was like, hey, you don't get to go like put your mail in whatever slot you want in a post office just because it's government property. Government property does not mean you get access to that property as a member of the public. And then of course we have Brandberg versus Hayes, maybe Brandsburg, one of the which I don't remember, which says that members of the press do not generally get granted access to areas that are off limits to the public. So I know there have been a lot of claims. I'm a member of the press and therefore I can be there. And so no. That's I'd love to be convinced, but
and
no one's done it so far.
Some places do recognize YouTube channels as being part of the media, but I would also recommend that they just look at the behavior exhibited by both the local and the national news stations. You don't see them demanding access to everywhere they think they should be able to go. They attend press conferences. They go out in public at normal hours and interview people in an unbiased way. I understand YouTube channels are sometimes they're activists, which isn't bad, but in Mr. DeCastro's case, he claims to be a journalist while displaying, I would say, negative objectivity.
Yeah, no, for sure. And a lot of the confusion that a lot of people have, to include people on my own channel who support what I do, there's a lot of confusion about that. And there is generally sort of a difference between a member of the press and a member of news media. And there are different statutes that will sort of address both. Whereas a member of the press is a very generic, you are acquiring information to disseminate information. Whereas news media, maybe you are a member of an organization that can be held accountable through civil actions, and therefore you can get access to information that may be limited to members of the mere press. And so that's the thing. Before I continue, Ginger, thanks so much. Says, Blue, can you please add this to the money for the gift basket that I did not get sent last night? Absolutely, it will get added. I don't know if you were paying attention, Paul, but we did a little fundraiser last night to just send some gift baskets out to the people that have had to interact with Chili. I feel like they deserve it. And it went very well, and everyone's very, very generous. But, yeah. No, his stuff is nonsense. Now, regarding his cell phone, I've talked about his cell phone a few times and how he's like, oh, you can't take that from me. We're holding it illegally, which I feel like I've done a pretty decent job sort of being like, no. You had some information before we started the stream about the act that he's trying to utilize to get it back, which would be, we were talking about it earlier, and I've already forgotten.
Yeah, so the term that he's using is called Replevin, which, as a lawyer, honest to God, the last time that I heard that statement was reading a case from the 1600s in a textbook in law school. So it's a very archaic term, but it is statutorily codified for Ohio. It basically is a civil suit to get back specific property. There's a converse law referred to as trover, where you're trying to sue somebody to get damages for lost property, but replevin is to get the specific thing. And this old case that we read was about a guy who steals a pearl necklace from somebody and then sells it. And so the original owner finds out the buyer has it and sues him for Replevin because they want that specific pearl necklace back. In this case, Chili's trying to use a Replevin action to get his cell phone back from the police, who have it as part of their investigation. And he's going about it all wrong. And what really gets me is that he's fundraising so that he can have money to file these suits, and they're baseless. If he had any notion about how the law and court procedure actually function, he wouldn't be doing this. If he had gone and talked to a lawyer, they wouldn't have told him to do this. But every time you file something, there's a filing fee, and he's just going to keep doing this over and over again for these motions and these lawsuits that aren't going to be successful, and he's not using his money, so he has no incentive to stop.
That's a fair point. That's a very fair point. And he's raised a lot of money for this, more than I imagine he would ever need for just the filings and all of that. Even the fine for the crimes that he has been arrested for don't carry enough of an amount to really put much of a dent in what he's collected. A few days ago, the number that I was given that I have not been able to confirm was about $35,000. And even for vehicle rental, even for a rental space to live in, that's well in excess of anything that he actually needs. So I think he's doing pretty okay when it comes to money for filing these things.
And what's more is that the people that he's trying to entice to give him money are already cash strapped as it is. They're people who don't work high-paying jobs and have their own financial problems in and of themselves, but he's still advocating that they contribute to this fund of his where he's going to make all of these big changes while going about it in the most ineffective way possible.
And only in one state. So if you're donating out of state, might not help you that much. I do want to answer a question.
Unless all of his lawsuits in Missouri and
right, I forgot he's been spreading them out. Oh boy. TNPIR has donated. Thank you so much for that, by the way. It is not too late to contribute. I will put that in there as well. Thank you so much. I have his lawsuit in front of me, which I can show here to the group. I don't know if I'm able to share with you, unfortunately. I could probably put it in like a chat for you to pull up, or I could just read it to you and you just stop me where you identify something that's wrong. But it's not terribly impressive in my mind, but I'm not the expert. It does have the cost of about $118, which doesn't seem like that much for what he's trying to go about doing. And it's about the incident where he allegedly locked down a school, which, if we remember from one of my earlier videos, the police said that he locked it down. The principal of the school said he locked it down. And the head of the education board, or the superintendent of the school, said that at 1 p.m. there was no lockdown. Now, they did not say there was never a lockdown. They said that there was not a lockdown at the time of 1 p.m., which actually kind of shows up in this this lawsuit. So, would you mind if I read it and you can just identify potential issues, possibly?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, let's pull that up. So we got Jose de Castro as the plaintiff versus Ironton Police Department et al. WowK TV, a Nexstar Media Group Inc. broadcasting station. I don't know that that's relevant for. I don't think he names Nexstar Media Group as well, so I don't know if that's important.
I mean, when you're filing a lawsuit, in law school, we had a tort professor ask us, now, if somebody's injured you, who do you sue? And we make guesses, and he says, no, the answer is everybody.
Yep.
You sue everybody you possibly can. So you sue the news agency, you sue the news broadcaster, specifically, you sue the organization that owns the news agency. You throw them all on there, and then what they are going to do is start providing reasons why they are not responsible. Yes. And then that will boil it down to the people who could be held responsible under whatever code or statute you're using, but there have to actually be merits to the case for them to start really panicking.
Sure. Now, this is what was interesting to me, because absolutely, I've also heard that from people who I've talked to about this. You put everyone down and then just knock them off as they go. But he says that they are a broadcasting station from Nexstar Media Group, but he never lists Nexstar Media Group separately. So I don't know if that would really be relevant at that point. But like, I feel like if he's going to list it, he should then go ahead and list Nexstar, because they approved or trained or have some sort of responsibility under some sort of bond or whatever they would have.
There's a legal principle called respondeat superior, which is let the person who's in charge answer. So if you're hit by a delivery truck driver, you can sue him, you can sue the person or the company that he works for, and then the company that he works for is the one you really want to go after, because they're the ones with the money to recompense you.
Absolutely. And we have Andy Bernhardt, who is a reporter for WOW KTV. We have Bailey Brodigan, who is a reporter for WOW KTV, and Bob Shaper, who is a news director for WOW KTV. Now, WOW KTV is not the initial reporting party of the incident, which I think is very interesting. They reported this at around 12:30, that there had been a lockdown. However, at around 10:30, a different news station also reported it with an interview with the principal, who gave information about the incident. The only thing that WOW KTV did was say that the police stated the lockdown was due to a video that had been sent to a student or teacher. So I feel like he's missing a prime bit of rib there if he's going to file that lawsuit, which is the person who, or the news station that actually reported a lot more facts about this, to include the principal, who said yes, as opposed to WOW KTV, who just reported that at 1 p.m. there was not a lockdown. Well, we don't really expect him to do that well, or I don't, at least. I don't want to put words into your mouth, of course. He says, I, Jose DeCastro of Ironton in Lawrence, Ohio, make oath and say that. Now, would that make sense? He says, I, Jose DeCastro of Ironton, because he's not from Ironton. Is it just that he's filing in Ironton?
So I'm trying to think about this here. His residence, according to his criminal case, is still in California.
Right.
And so it would not be proper for him to say that he is of Ironton, Ohio, because he's not what's called domiciled here. I used to live in Minnesota. I moved to Ohio. I changed my domicile to an Ohio address because that's where I reside. And so the expectation is that within a reasonable period of time of moving to a town in a new state, you're going to change your domicile to that. Some states have varying requirements. Like I know in Minnesota, it was, do you plan on staying in the state? Do you work in the state? Some of those other common things that people do when they move to a new place. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's an issue they would really bog down on, but it's still
doesn't look good,
demonstrating that he doesn't really know proper lawsuit filing procedure.
Yeah, perfect. I missed that the first time around. I'm glad I caught that this time, because that's actually, I think that's very interesting. I'm glad you were here to confirm that. So he goes, on 3/25/2022, an officer from Ironton Police Department contacted WOW KTV. Now, was it that long ago? I guess it might have been. Contacted WOW KTV and or Andy Bernhardt and or Bailey Brodigan and falsely reported the plaintiff had sent, quote, a concerning video, end quote, to a student or parent, which caused the school to go into lockdown. Now, the report, I don't believe, said that he had sent that video. I believe it said that a video had been sent to a student or a parent. But at no point do I remember seeing that it claimed that he was the one who had sent it. So I feel like that's not, I mean, that would be something worth expanding on for sure. But all the police have to do is say, oh, no, we didn't tell them that. And the reporter has to go, we didn't report that. You made that assumption. The reality was the police maybe believed that the lockdown was caused by chilly in that they had been shown a video of his erratic and concerning behavior, and because the school believed that he might be a threat to the students, they had locked down due to that video, which someone had sent someone else to be like, hey, I know who that is. That's this guy. Check this out. I don't.
Right. This sort of stuff
weak.
may seem like minutia, but at the same time, if it's discovered that what Chili had alleged in his assertion of facts in the lawsuit isn't the case, that may quash any argument that he makes about the WoW TV station being liable. So it matters what they reported, whether that was we've received confirmation, we were told, we saw in another, or other news stations are also reporting this. It does depend on how they phrased their broadcast that allege that he caused the lockdown, or that he's assuming is saying that he caused the lockdown. That kind of language being specifically articulated matters.
Yes, that I would agree with, because he has to prove that the statement was either false or made without or made with like a negligent or blatant disregard to whether or not it was true for this defamation to go forward. I think we could argue, or I would certainly put forth the argument that he should be considered a public figure, which makes it a lot harder for him to actually win a defamation case. Assuming this is a defamation case, I know he stated he wanted to file it as a defamation case. However, his filing. So all they have to really establish at that point for the news station is saying, hey, we just reported that the police told us this. We didn't report that it actually happened. And the police just have to go, oh, well, yeah, we thought that this was the case. We had reason to believe that this was the case. And as far as the reason for the lockdown did take place. And at no point did anybody state or say that anybody stated that you were the one that sent the video. Although maybe we made a statement in error, it does not rise to a level where damages can be considered.
Right. I'm trying to remember. There was a funny South Park episode with something like this in it, where some minor disaster happens, and then there's a reporter saying, and we've even heard that there are cases of cannibalism, and somebody asks, oh my God, you've seen people eating each other? No, we haven't seen it. We're just reporting it. Like, it's one thing to say, we have seen this occur, or we've confirmed from our sources that this occurred. It's another to say, we've been told this happened. And I know it seems like legal jargon or trying to maneuver to get out of things, but newscasters are very specific a lot of times in how they phrase things.
Mm-hmm.
They may say, this appears to be, or this seems like, because from their perspective, they're telling the truth. Something may look like something when really be something else. And they want to cover their bases to not make defamatory statements on air. If you're in the news media, you're either trained on that, or you learn that through other practice that newscasters do.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing this complaint, but he does go on and he says, Bob Schaefer is WowK TV's news director and is in charge of the entire staff and oversees the daily operation of the television newsroom and website content, which would be him establishing that Bob is also liable for failing to stop the publication, I imagine. He goes on then to say, on 3/25/2022, WowK 13 and Bailey Brodigan and Andy Bernhardt printed the report on WowK website. I would have put down published, but it's semantics. I think it's not really going to hinder him. It's just interesting, unless it is a requirement that it be considered printed for some old Ohio law.
So defamation is statements made verbally, or I'm sorry, defamation has two categories, slander and libel. Slander is verbal, libel is written.
Yes. So in this case, I think he's going after the newspaper for libel and the police for slander, for verbalizing those words to the reporters. But I mean, I don't think the semantic would really hinder him as to the printed. He does say earlier that day, Andy Bernhardt contacted plaintiff to set up an interview for this same day, which seems irrelevant, but maybe he establishes further down the case. On his itemized list, he says, number 3, on 3/25/2022, during the interview between News and plaintiff, a man aggressively approached plaintiff, continuing the false statements provided by Ironton Police Department and News. The false information provided by the Ironton Police Department and News nearly caused the stranger to take violent actions upon plaintiff, putting his life and limb at risk of physical injury and or death. That feels like a good claim to establish damages, but I think it would be difficult for them to actually be like, oh, my life and limb, considering how often he says, I'll take you in a cage, I can beat up anybody, I'll take on anybody, I would win. I feel like there's some room for debate and back and forth on that in particular, but he was very aggressively confronted by an individual. However, I think the confrontation may have been more about the fact that the school locked down, that he was on school property, than it was about the actual sending of a video, which may or may not have happened from him.
Yeah, I'm trying to find here. There was a previous live stream where something actually quite funny happened. Chili was making a live stream in, I think it was in a city civic center, and he was approached by, I think it was an ex-police officer who somebody he was interviewing had accused of stealing. And he approached Chili and handed him a written statement claiming under one of Ohio's statutes that Chili was required to read the statement as mitigation for the false statements that he made against Chili, or against this particular guy on his channel. And I'm trying to find that code here.
Oh, I'll delay. Yeah, no, take your time. I'll read some super chats. Vaping Pex, thank you so much. Says, fun fact, Chili was the one who called the cops a P word. I guess he admitted it in his live stream. That is good. I'm glad that he was the one that did that, not the police, because it would have been an unprofessional thing if the police do, obviously. I doubt it would have hindered anything about the prosecution, but, you know, I like to imagine police should be a little more professional than the general public, of course, be able to rein themselves in. Judy Lapointe, thank you so much, says, saw on Law Talk with Mike that Chili said he is doing all of this for the uneducated people, most with no teeth, said he will stand up for their rights. He really said that about his supporters. I mean, maybe not the best statement to make. I understand where he's coming from. I think phrasing is obviously very important. I think he lacks, oftentimes, the necessary sort of rounding of corners when it comes to the presentation of how he talks about people. But it would make sense for him to say, hey, you guys don't know much about the law, and that's why I'm stepping up and doing this. And the teeth thing is weird.
He gets fixated on the teeth, but
very fixated on teeth.
I mean, he at one point removes his false front teeth, and did you not see this?
No, I knew they were fake. I knew that he said he got them punched out of his face and they were fake.
I think it was like the first 2 or 3 teeth on his right side.
Oh wow!
And so he removes this crown or cap or whatever they call it for it, and then he proceeds to imitate like a caricature of a drug addicted person and how they're portrayed in shows like South Park. And then he says, see, I'm just one of you guys.
Oh wow.
But it was very bizarre, and it seemed to come completely out of nowhere.
Oh, Chili. Oh no. I've been saying it. I think he's losing it. I think he's in way over his head. And I'm fairly certain that in California, he had his nice little studio house, whatever, car set up, and he limited who he interacted with, and he had all his muscly friends who were like, wow, you're so smart for a big, strong guy. And on the internet, he blocked whoever he wanted to block, and everything was great. And then, you know, the revenue maybe dried up, and he needed to go out and change how he interacted with the world and spread his nonsense for money. And now that he's found himself in the real world and discovered that, oh, out here it's a lot harder to block out the people I don't want to hear that might expose my scam, things are not going so high. And so he has to, or his mentality is to meet opposition with aggression and say, I'm going to one-up you. And this is all personal observation and opinion, But I think that this is really what's becoming a problem. And now with him engaging in this activity, he's attracting a new audience that's a lot more aggressive and a lot more demanding that he needs to keep up with to get anything from. And I think he's going to be facing a lot more criminal issues, some civil issues, very likely. And I think he's going to burn out potentially very spectacularly.
I'm very inclined to agree with you. The thing that I not necessarily assumed, but it seemed to me as though even if he was big on TikTok like he claims he was, that is a platform where there isn't the same degree of dialogue and response like there is on YouTube. I mean, the auditors make a video and the quote unquote watchdogs, as they're called, make a response video and back and forth. And on TikTok, it doesn't seem like there's that same degree of dialogue.
Right.
And so he probably didn't experience pushback like this of people saying, no, here's a detailed explanation of why you're wrong on all of these things you're claiming.
Right, because you have limited character counts and all that. I believe it was his interactions with the comments that got his TikTok deleted because
That
they just got
wouldn't surprise
so
me
bad.
at all.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
The other thing too is that even though he's raising these large amounts of money, the more and more lawsuits he tries to file, whether he's doing so properly or not, if he files a lawsuit that requires an answer from the other party and the lawsuit is deemed frivolous or it's dismissed on summary judgment motion, the other side's going to ask for legal fees. They're going to say, this cost us time and money to respond to, and his allegations were baseless. Anybody reading the law could have determined that in the first place.
Right.
He shouldn't have done this, and we want to be compensated for our time. So he should be cautious that he does not accrue a lot of those in all of these various states that he's claiming he has lawsuits in.
Yeah, so here in Washington, I know that if you file a civil suit against someone, it opens you up for a countersuit, at least in small claims. The only place I've really looked into that. Ohio may have something similar. I know that there are plenty of people that have more grounds for a lawsuit against him than he does against them. And before I keep going, I do want to caution Kendall in the comments to maybe chill down a little bit here for a second. Okay, behave yourself. I mean, you do what you want. You're a free inhabitant of my YouTube channel, but this is a place to learn. So actions do have consequences. I'm not the government, so I can kick you out. Behave yourself. Anyway. And that warning goes to everybody, but you guys are doing great. It was just that one in particular, very, very strong. So, moving on with this, or did you find the thing you were looking for? Did we already say it? I'm so distracted by all of the nonsense.
The statute that the ex-police officer who approached Chile had cited was Ohio Revised Code Section 273903. Which is titled Conditions for Liability of Owners, Licensees, or Operators of a Radio Television Station. And specifically subsection B does state, this is more working against Chile in his lawsuit against WOWK, the owner, licensee, or operator shall not be liable for any damages for any defamatory statement published or uttered in or as part of a visual or sound radio broadcast by one other than the owner. So even if Chile is claiming that he was defamed on the WOWK broadcast by the angry parent who approached him about the alleged school lockdown, even if he's saying this guy made defamatory statements on WOWK's broadcast, therefore I'm entitled to sue them for defamation, well, that statute's saying that's not the case. If it wasn't WOWK or any of their employees, they can't be held liable for what somebody screams on the media or on a news station.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fun. I'd like that they found that and went, hey, bud. I think he's also trying to say, like, this man threatened my life. But at that point, like, surely pursue criminal charges or something. Like, not that stops you from doing civil, but
alleged criminal charges against him, sue him for assault is generally when somebody threatens you. Battery is when they actually put their hands on you.
Right.
He can certainly pursue any of those charges he wants to, but he can't say because of what this guy said on WOWK, I get to sue them for defamation. There has to be actual fault with
Right.
that organization or its employees.
Perfect. See, I hope he watches this because he'll learn so much. I hope. Probably not. Let's see. All right. His fourth thing on his list. On 3/25/2022, during the interview between Andy Bernhardt of WOW KTV and plaintiff, a man aggressively approached plaintiff, continuing the false statement provided by Ironton Police Department and News. Now, you might think this sounds awfully familiar. Yes, the false information provided by the Irontown, not Ironton, but it's fine, Police Department and News nearly caused the stranger to take violent actions upon plaintiff, putting his life and limb at risk of physical injury or death. He's basically just listed the exact same thing, but stating it's in regards to Andy Bernhardt.
Was it ever also determined that that was the source that this man who approached him got the information from? I mean, if he had a kid there, what if the kid just texted saying, "Hey, Dad, they locked our school down"?
Excellent question. Rennie, write that down because I really want to check that later. Because that's fantastic. Because if he went, "Hey, you're talking to the people that I saw the report on you about the school." Yeah, but it would be a lot different if someone's like, "Hey, Dad, I just came back from school and they locked it down." Oh.
Yeah, if the kid texts Dad saying there's a crazy guy causing our school to be locked down, and then the guy approaches him again on national news media, that doesn't result in the news station being guilty of defamation.
Yeah.
Or responsible, I should say.
Oh, that's I didn't even think about that. That's an excellent point. This is why you're the guy with the law degree.
And I can definitely understand why people get irritated with the minutia like this, but this is how the law functions.
Mm-hmm.
I understand it's frustrating. Lawyers get aggravated at the legal system too, but the reason things are the way they are is because somebody was wronged in some way and a law was passed as a result of it. When Chili tries to claim in his court filings, like, the judge needs to say the police have to give me my phone back. Well, the police, if they're a party to a motion, they get a chance to respond. You don't just get to say, "Hey, judge, tell the police what to do." They have to give an answer. And the government still gets treated like a party when it's being sued by somebody.
Yeah.
It's easy to overlook that and to just think that you're fighting against the government and therefore you get to dictate terms, but the government gets a representative. They're going to have a lawyer for whatever agency is being sued, and they're going to get to make arguments in their favor as well.
That fair point. Very fair point. Absolutely. But of course, someone tried teaching Chili that. Now, before I keep going, no, go ahead.
Ironically enough, one of the principles of rule of law that Chili loves to quote so much is that the government and the people are held to the same standards. Well, that's never more apparent than when you have a lawyer for the government and a lawyer for the person suing the government battling it out in court. I mean, it's easy for him to make these assertions that the whole system is corrupt and working against the people, but the government has to have lawyers representing its interests too.
Right. Because if we're going to say, oh, it's public property, it's the government is the people, it's owned by the people, what's the people? So people get representation. I'm sure there's a better way to phrase that argument that I could sit down and think out, but, I'm not a crazy person, so I would never try to present that as, like, a real, like, sort of like what Chili's doing. I don't even know what I'm saying right now.
As a prosecutor, prosecutors represent the people of that community. And when somebody commits a crime, the people of the community are also hurt. And so the prosecutor is working in their interests to try and bring this person to justice. Mm-hmm. I'm positive that by the Chili's next hearing, which I think is April 28th, according to the docket, he's going to be railing against the prosecutor, trying to railroad him into prison or something to that effect. But if he violated the laws of the state, the people have an interest in seeing justice dispensed that way.
Absolutely. I expect him to file some stuff to be like, disbar this person, remove this judge from the whatever. I think he's already hinted at that a little bit.
And he can file bar complaints all he wants to. But if the prosecutor is doing their job, this is also an issue that Broken System, Broken Trust has. They're doing their job.
Yeah.
That's what they were hired to do. The people of the community get to be represented in criminal actions by the prosecutor. That's what they're there for.
Absolutely.
And one thing that's also, this may be me predicting things a little too far out, but Chili left Ironton tonight to go elsewhere to pursue his other lawsuits. And he claims that he's also going to be picking his stuff up from California and bringing it back to Ironton.
Now, I've heard that he's not supposed to be leaving.
I don't know what the terms of his bond were. And for a minor crime like this, I'm sure they're not going to make any demands that he stay in town. But if he's not back by the 28th, that's, you know, if he runs into trouble in Texas, if he runs into trouble in California and gets detained there and can't make it back to Ironton, he's going to get in even more trouble. And I'm sure he'll be saying it was the corrupt cops in California keeping me from defending myself in Ohio and vice versa.
It's a federal conspiracy under 18 U.S.C. 242. Deprivation of color of law or something. I'm sure. Now, before I keep going, TNPIR, thank you so much, by the way, says, question about Chili I've been dying to ask. Is he an enthusiastic profit seeker doing what he's got to do, or as truly militant in his beliefs as he looks in videos? I think most of it's profit. I think he believes a lot of like, oh, I don't like police. I think he absolutely does not like police. And I want to share a bit of experience that I've had. So a couple years ago or so, when there was, you know, the Chop Chaz zone and the protests and riots in Seattle, I attended a fair few of those events as an observer to sort of see what was being said and what it was like in this sort of major movement in Seattle that ended up with the unlawful occupation of a city block, which turned into an anarchist organization. It was really, really fascinating. I'm not like out here to bash them or anything. I recognize the unlawful part of it, but also I kind of respect that what they, not necessarily what they stood for, but like, wow, what an accomplishment. And it takes
a lot of conviction to block
off
an entire city block.
That would be, I mean, that would be an hours-long conversation back and forth about the ideas behind what they thought. And I'm not trying to get into that because I recognize that some of what they're saying is not bad. Some of it's even good. A lot of it was just like, oh, no, you don't, ooh. But now I'm just going to be confusing people. I'm already confusing myself. In regards to that, I like to think of myself as a calm, cool, collected individual who's certainly in control of his emotions. I know I like to go crazy on my streams, but in reality, I can put on a very serious face, and I have professionally. In those situations where you are challenged by people, like, for example, I'm on a sidewalk with a camera documenting what's happening. Nothing crazy is happening. It's not a riot yet, but people are coming on there saying, you need to leave, and like poking me with umbrellas and blocking me. And I have a man in a military uniform over there just like pretending not to see it happen. And I've got lawyers that are the observers I had never heard of before that, where they just go and they're working for the ACLU. And there's legal observers who would literally turn their back if I went, excuse me, can you step in? This is a First Amendment right. And they would just zoop. Like, that's very upsetting. And I got very upset and a little louder than I would have liked to be. I wasn't like hitting people or anything like that, but I would state these court cases that it didn't matter that I was stating them a lot louder than I would have normally. Also, it was louder there and they'd be shouting at me. And I can understand his actions of being like, oh my God, this tyranny, it frustrates me so much, and getting really angry just because he's being challenged on something he thinks he's right about. When in reality, that's not what he's trying to do. He's trying to make that money because this is a thing that he thinks he can make money off of. But when things hit the fan, he does become very aggressive. I can relate to that. Other things, if you see my videos in Gary's mod, where the police unlawfully arrest me, I get heated. I get literally real-world angry about that. It's a video game, but these people are pretending to be police officers. They should know better. And I set up situations to challenge them, and I know exactly how it's supposed to go down that I dealt with in my real-life job as a real-world law enforcement officer. and I get real world heated. So I think that he just gets also real world heated when he's not really trying to. So I think it's a little column A, column B in that if anything I said makes sense.
Yeah, and two things. One, to go off the Chaz chop zone thing. When I lived in Minnesota, I lived in Minneapolis, and I lived about 2 blocks away from the police station that Derek Chauvin operated out of. So when George Floyd was murdered,
Yeah.
like the street that he was murdered on is one that I drove home to get to work on every day. And when the riots started happening, my wife and I watched from our 4th floor condo unit as looters and rioters were breaking into buildings. Our building shared a parking lot with a small strip mall that 2/3 of it got burned to the ground.
Oh,
So we're
yeah.
watching these fires running, and there were a couple nights where we just didn't get any sleep because we're trying to make sure our building didn't catch on fire. It was absolutely insane. And we would see police cars drive into our parking lot with sirens blazing, and everybody would scatter. And then as soon as they drove away, because they couldn't respond to every incident, then people would come back and start rioting and looting. But one big issue that I took with what was going on the West Coast was there was a federal court building.
Oh, in Portland, yeah.
Yeah, that the federal troopers were trying to defend. And here's the thing, they have a mandate to maintain the integrity of federal property, and people were like, just give up the building. It's like,
no, it's not.
That's not what's
But
supposed
it's
to
the
have
people's
happen.
building. They pay taxes. Don't you know that? They can burn it down if they want. That's totally how it works. Yeah, no. My frustration was people were like, these are secret police. Like, no, these are, I think they were Department of Homeland Security police, or they were something. They were like a legitimate thing that has existed for a while. It might have been, it might not have been DHS. It might have been, I forget. But they're like, oh, they don't have names. That makes them secret. Like, they have identifying numbers. There's no federal requirement to have your name on a uniform. It's just that's often
And it was a
for
federal
local police.
building.
Yeah, like
that's why the local police weren't the ones trying to defend it.
But they were on city property. Like, yeah, the city of Portland was like, cool, concurrent jurisdiction. Pew pew pew.
I was gonna say, try storming an embassy and saying you're in the United States, but also that is territorially belonging to the nation that has the embassy there.
Right, exactly. Just it doesn't. It's very frustrating. I'm sure you understand. There's like, oh, I just want to teach all of you. Like, please be receptive to it. This is not a difficult thing, but I can't teach you if you're not willing to learn about it.
And the other thing that I wanted to touch on was Chili loves to make the assertions that, oh, these cops would never do what they're doing without a badge. It's like, yeah, that's the point. The badge and the authority vested in them as police officers is what allows them to do what they're doing. Yes. He says, I wouldn't go up and grab somebody off the street. And it's like, no private citizen would do that.
Yeah, no. Well, he said that if he was a police officer, he wouldn't arrest his own family members. Like, ooh, that's tyranny, bud. Like, I'm sure if I said, hey, here's a police officer that refused to arrest his own family, he'd be like, oh, tyrant. Like, bro, but you literally said that was acceptable.
And there were police officers in Ironton who said, oh, yeah, I've arrested my family members. And he's like, how could you do that to your family?
Because
he's literally speaking out of both sides of his mouth. Either they're tyrants for upholding the law against their family members, or they'd be tyrants for prioritizing their family members over the other members of the public.
And it's that kind of thing that tells you that he has an objective that doesn't rely on truth. And my belief is that objective is money.
And I think that objective is clouded by his blinding white hatred for police for grievances he experienced in his past. Whether legitimate or illegitimate, he very clearly has, I think Artie refers to them as hate boners for the police.
Yes.
Shout out to Artie.
Fantastic application of statement there. Frank Perry, thank you so much, by the way, says, since he has a weapon with him, is there not rules for transportation of weapons across state lines? There are rules. As long as he's transporting it lawfully, I don't know if he can carry it concealed or within his reach across state lines. That might depend. So, oh man, that actually, it depends on the type of weapon. He has a revolver. It shouldn't trigger a lot of the stuff that you might encounter with transportation of firearms across state lines. Certainly, transportation with the intent to sell, which would be a whole different list of things. If he has a concealed carry permit that is valid in the states that he is crossing from and to, I don't think there would be an issue.
And to my knowledge, and I could be wrong on this because I haven't been keeping up on Ohio's rules, the need for concealed carry permits has been eliminated, and I believe that law has taken effect.
Okay.
So he should be fine within the state of Ohio. I genuinely don't know about Kentucky, and I think it's West Virginia in the tri-state area, but
yeah, I get this feeling that both of those are pretty relaxed about that sort of thing, though.
Yeah, and I think Texas is where he's headed to right now. I don't envision there being a problem for him gun-related in Texas, but if he goes back to California, he may want to be careful.
Oh, yeah, no, California, like it's impossible to get a concealed carry. I knew people who did security work. They're like, yep, I'm a security guard. I want a license to carry a weapon. And they went, no, no, but I have a security license. Don't care. But I live in a bad neighborhood. Okay, cool. Sucks to be you. I can't say that's a universal thing, but I do know that. And maybe they weren't giving me all the information. I don't know. It wasn't me. But anyway, what else is he saying on his lawsuit there? 3/25/2022, the school district superintendent Joe Galetka made a comment on WOW KTV and or Andy Bernhardt and or Bailey Brodigan confirmed that the school was, in fact, not in lockdown. That details were added to the news story on the same day at 1 p.m. And we've hit the wrong button there. We've already talked about, they never said that a lockdown didn't take place. In fact, all evidence seems to point to the contrary, including people in my chat who I can't confirm to actually be from Ironton. But they've been saying there was a lockdown. The principal has said there was a lockdown. So the fact that Joe Galetka is saying at 1 p.m. there is not a lockdown just seems to tell us that everything's cool now. He's left. That feels meaningless. That his claim on that one.
Yeah, I would think so. Again, newscasters can be very strategic in the language they use, and if that person said there is not a lockdown right now and there wasn't one at the time, then they haven't made any false statement.
My thoughts exactly. All right, next he is on 3/25/2022. WOW KTV published a video about plaintiff after conducting the interview. The video does not include any questions or answers or discussions made during the interview, only silent footage of plaintiff speaking with two different men, one of which is the aggressive man in a red sweatshirt. Andy Bernhardt was present the entire time, along with the video camera equipment. Well, he's in public. Doesn't he say that you can film anything in public? I don't understand what he's getting at there.
And if he's taking issue with the notion that they edited the film or the footage to only cover the amount of time set aside in that broadcast for it, I mean, you can't expect news organizations to broadcast every second of every interview.
No. And I mean, if he can prove that they edited it to make him look bad with the intent to make him look bad, I've seen a lot of paperwork in my day on waivers that address that specifically. So I assume that this is something that news station want to be careful of, but I don't think he says anything, or he alleges that they did that they edited it in such a way to make him look bad, just that there was no audio, which I don't like. Okay, cool.
If you're just filming somebody doing something with no audio and no implication about what's being said, there's no harm there.
Doesn't it make sense? His final thing is all defendants have committed slander and or libel or is some way liable for said slander and or libel. But
did he literally
really
say or is some way liable?
Verbatim.
Yikes.
Or is in some way like, oh, so prove it? How in some way? How? Because he didn't prior to that statement. He tried unsuccessfully. There's nothing there that's like hard evidence
And to be fair to him, what can occur in a lawsuit is that somebody may legitimately think that there's been a grievance, and then they start what's called the discovery process, where the lawsuit's filed, the parties are recognized, they have an initial hearing, and then parties have to exchange discovery, meaning they have to provide the other party with everything they intend to use against that person in trial. And as much as people love the dramatic courtroom reveal of I've got new evidence and all that stuff, that's not how it works.
Yeah, it's a little
If you're
tricky to
going
make
to
that
trial
happen.
unprepared, it's because you didn't do your job properly.
Mm-hmm.
But in discovery, you can take something called a deposition of somebody, meaning they have to sit down and under oath answer questions that the other party has to depose them. And so you may discover in the course of a legitimately filed lawsuit that there aren't grounds for the lawsuit to go forward, or that what you thought was the case really actually wasn't. And then lawsuits can be dismissed as a result of that. Here, I just, after listening to Chili interview people and the way he monologues over the top of their testimony, I have no doubt that he would absolutely butcher a deposition trying to conduct it himself.
I'd love to see him try.
Even if people testified in depositions, which are under oath, to things that are contrary to how he views the circumstances, he would just say, they're lying, I want to keep going to trial and sue this person on top of everybody else.
You know, they're Blandino, just like, sir, stop talking. The jury can see you do it.
If your lawyer has to tell you to shut up,
yeah,
that's
good.
A real bad sign.
Yeah, that is, you're not wrong. Now, regarding his Replevin paperwork, his cause of action, I would love to go through this because it's so messy. I'm a resident of California, Los Angeles County, which seems to go against what he said before, where he is,
of Ironton.
Of Ironton, yeah. Defendant is a resident of Ohio and Lawrence County. This court has jurisdiction and venue over this matter because it involves residents of Lawrence County and property that's located in blank county. He didn't fill out the county that the property is located in. It says, I own the following property, iPhone 12 Max. My ownership of the property is evidenced by Ironton Police Department, which is not what that means. Ironton put it into evidence, but what they're looking for is my proof that this is my property is. But his proof that it's his property is not Ironton Police Department. He'd be like, it's my login, I have the password, I pay the bills, I purchased the phone, I have the receipt. But he's saying my ownership of the property is evidenced by Ironton Police Department, thinking that they're asking whose evidence it is in possession of. Which
and this just goes to his misunderstanding of how both motions should be written and how trial procedure works. And what I should clarify is happening here is that the police arrested him for, I think it was disorderly conduct was what was listed. Whether it was disorderly conduct or trespass or whatever, that's a criminal.
Oh, sorry.
That's a criminal action.
Yes.
And he recorded himself being arrested while performing this criminal act, and so the police seized the phone as part of their investigation into his criminal act. Whether they are valid in doing that is beside the point. They have the phone related to this investigation, and my assumption would be that it's legitimate because even though his video was live streamed, there's something called the best evidence rule, which means you always want to get the original piece of evidence whenever you can. If you don't have that, you usually have to have some kind of affidavit attesting to the validity of a copy of it, if it's a document or something to that effect. And so here, the metadata on his video from his phone is what's going to indicate that this was the original source of this video. Even though they could get it offline, they don't know if somebody has live streamed it and put their own narrative over it. They don't know if anything else has been tampered with it. But if they get it directly from his phone that they took during the arrest, they know that it's not going to have been tampered with. And the fact that they had this incident to their investigation means a Replevin action is also not proper because that's a civil motion to return unlawfully seized property. And they have it lawfully, so he's going to be unsuccessful there. But this is also a counter. I mean, it's not really even a counter motion. It's just a parallel motion. They have it pursuant to a criminal investigation. If he files in civil court, that's a different action. Probably the best way for him to accomplish what he wants to do would be to motion for the judge in his criminal case to have the phone returned to him, which he tried to orally move to have his motion for Replevin heard in his criminal arraignment, and the judge was like, I can't hear this. And now Chile is saying the judge is corrupt and is violating his civil rights by doing that. But he makes these allegations because he doesn't understand court procedure, either criminal or civil, and then he makes these accusations of the judge being corrupt and the system being corrupt. But really, it's just that he doesn't understand how it works.
And we see that a lot is, oh, the system's corrupt. Like, no, it's just because you don't get it, right? Like, feel free to try to make changes by all means. But the way the current system is this: they're not acting outside of the current system. If you have a problem with the system, change the system. But it doesn't make much sense to be like, police, ooh, and then people go, but Nazis, and you go, cool. So under the Nazi regime, you didn't get to vote to change the system. Guess what you can do in America? It's a whole thing. Anyway, Oreo pudding, welcome to the Bacon Bits. Thank you so much, by the way. Let's see. Or please go ahead.
And here's the other thing too. If the government is a party to a lawsuit and they behaved the way he does, if they tried to file civil motions in a criminal hearing, if they tried to make improper motions or ask for things orally in court when they haven't prepared for it ahead of time, the government's going to deny it. The government's going to say, you know better than this. I'm not going to grant your motions because they're improperly or untimely filed. The government would get the same treatment that Chile is, and that, again, is part of due process and part of the rule of law. The government has to follow the rules just like the people filing lawsuits do.
As it should. It
right.
boggles my mind that people are going, oh, but this or that, and specifically about this situation, about, oh, there's this corruption. We're literally, like, it's not hard. I am not trained and educated on court procedures. I like to read up on it. I am trained and educated on criminal procedures as, like the first steps of, getting that information to the court as law enforcement. But you'd think a man who'd studied the Constitution for 20 years would be more familiar with this. 20 years is way longer than I've been doing this.
And even lawyers are susceptible to this.
Oh,
just
sure.
like you have specialties for doctors,
absolutely.
You're not going to have a brain surgeon operate on somebody's heart. You're not going to want to have an attorney who's only done probate actions go prosecute somebody criminally. They're not going to know all of the proper procedure to do it without taking the time to learn it. And it's just not going to work out for you. Part of the benefit of law school is that it teaches you how to think like an attorney, more so than memorizing cases and memorizing facts and memorizing specific principles of law. You have to actually approach the situation with the mindset of knowing where to look for the correct rules, knowing how to parse out the proper procedure that you're supposed to use for things. It's a lot of really painstaking, detail-oriented work, and lawyers still make mistakes all the time. So you can only imagine how susceptible a person who isn't an attorney is going to be to a system like this.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Now, regarding this Replevin thing, it starts to get even more fun. The defendant took possession of property belonging to me on March 29th, 2022. When did I just want to check to see if there are any conflicting dates. None that I can see immediately. He filed us on the 31st. That's fine. I just like to check that sort of thing. Where was I? I've lost myself. Defendant took possession of my property by force against my will. And he spelled will W-H-I-L-L. Semantics, but just a fun little thing if I'm pointing this out. I request the return of my property. Defendant has failed to return the property belonging to me. The property being held by defendants is worth my, and then it says value of property. And he says civil liberties, which is not what they're looking for in that answer. But thank goodness he said it because it made me laugh very hard when I first saw it. No, they're looking for a value so that they can determine possible damages as to the
And
value of the item.
and again, with the difference between Replevin and Trover, with Replevin, just the sheer dollar amount value is probably all you're going to get for something. But with a Replevin action, you want the specific property for a reason. If in that old English case it was a string of pearls, you would say, this has sentimental value to my family for X, Y, and Z reasons. It's a generational artifact. We want that specific thing back. Here, even though he's claiming the cost of this is the violation of my civil liberties, the iPhone has a value, but the information on the iPhone he can say is invaluable for whatever reasons he wants to list.
Mm-hmm. But he doesn't exactly do that, but it's all right. Upon information and belief, the property is in the actual possession of defendant and is located at, and then it has the location, I assume, of the police department. Second cause of action, defendant has wrongfully exerted control of my property. Defendant has converted my property. I don't think that converted would be accurate given the circumstances.
Conversion typically refers to taking property and then operating as though it's your own. So in this case, I would have to imagine if they started using the phone like it belonged to the police department,
Start
like
ordering
using
pieces.
it as, if they're using it as like, I guess a walkie-talkie is a bad example, but if they started using it in the capacity that officers use phones that the department owns, they're not doing that. I'm sure they have it secured in a box with whatever remote erasing protections the Ironton Police Department can afford for their level of.
It just drops it in a bucket with cement, and they're gonna jackhammer it out when it comes time to give it back. That's a joke.
I did appreciate the fact that when Chili was doing his immediate post-release stream, that he was talking about remotely wiping the phone through AT&T.
God.
And one of the people in his chat pointed out that would be felony tampering with evidence. So I don't think he did that, but at one point he was so dramatic that he did say, "I'll take the felony for it." So
he would have done it acknowledging the thing. I mean, because I looked into it, because I recognize.
And then he just live streamed himself saying, "Yes, I'm going to do this."
Yeah.
Felony.
As long as there's no overt act, he'll probably be fine. But there are defenses to it. I looked into it. There's some Ohio defense attorneys that have, pages on this sort of thing to get you to hire them to help you out, that sort of thing. So you would have a defense. Would it work? I mean, judging by what he's filing, I kind of feel like no. But
and I'm kicking myself because I can't seem to find the case again. But there was a case in Ohio where somebody had sued a police department for Replevin because of a computer that the police seized pursuant to an investigation, and the investigation resulted in no charges being filed. So the court case was concluded, and the police still had the computer, and the guy sued to get it back from them because it was his.
Sure.
And I'm pretty sure they granted that one, but it
was after the end of prosecution.
Right. So anytime you're citing case law in an argument, you're going to want to say, this case says this, and here's why the facts are similar enough to our case where this decision should influence you in our favor. So here he may say, see, the police had to give something back because of Replevin, but the police department's attorney or whoever's representing them would turn around and say, okay, but that was after the investigation.
Right.
So you distinguish why case law is either similar to or distinct from the case that you're arguing, and then you have to use that as to why the ruling in that case you're citing supports or opposes yours or the other party's motion.
Absolutely.
That's a nuance that is oftentimes lost on Chili, because he'll take a Supreme Court case especially and say, this case says this.
Well, I have his trifold. I really want to go over at least some of them with you, because my God, he ignores every single nuance that can be ignored. It's incredible. Right. It kills me.
And he picks these single sentence excerpts from the cases and say, this case is declaring this. which a lot of times in the general public, we talk about cases having that kind of effect, like the Obergefell v. Hodges case,
Sure.
effectively legalizing gay marriage. There was a lot more nuance in there, and if any court or if any lawyer is actually citing that case in his argument, he's going to have to go into the details of that case and say why it's similar to or distinct from the case at hand. But for the general public's edification, they look at it based on the result, which is fair, because that's going to be one of the big effects. But in terms of case law that gets cited in future cases, you have to argue based on the details of the case.
Right. Details, though. Just getting...
Who needs those details?
Yeah, we don't need details when it comes to law. Ridiculous. All right, what else we got? We got request for relief. I request the court order the following relief. Find that I am the owner of the property in question. I feel like that's up to him to establish, as opposed to... Well, I mean... Yes, if he established it, they would find him to be the owner, but he has not put down the correct thing to establish that he is the owner. And it says, grant me costs and damages. I don't know what the costs and damages would be, and I don't believe he establishes them either. It says, grant any other relief that may be just or equitable. I don't know if being that vague is appropriate.
I mean, to be fair, that is a provision that is in probably every motion filed along this sort of thing. What typically happens is that you may file a motion and there may be oral arguments about the motion. And so you would elaborate maybe a little bit more and explain in more detail how whatever is being argued damaged you in whatever way. But really, you should be putting as much as you can into your written arguments. And here, just based on what you read off, he didn't effectively prove that the phone was even his. He didn't effectively prove what the value of the phone or the value of his deprivation of the phone was. I mean, he didn't write his motion very well.
No, for a constitutional law scholar
and
who's going to pass the
to
bar
be
first time
fair,
in California.
I'm not disparaging him because he is not an attorney writing this kind of motion. I mean to point out the irony of him claiming that he is a constitutional law scholar, and he wanted to do this for other people. He wanted to represent Sarah Page in court and try and defend her against a traffic ticket when he's improperly filing motions in his own criminal case. He's failing to follow proper court procedure. He had to go to more than one court just to file the civil or the lawsuits that he wanted to. He would appear at a court and live stream himself, and the clerk would tell him, you're at the wrong place.
Yep.
Go to this other court.
Corruption, of course. That's what that is. Now,
it is his self-aggrandizement that I take issue with.
Yeah, it's just his... Look, if you don't know things, I expect people to not know things. I don't know. There's tons of things I don't know. There's so much I don't know. But I'm willing to learn, and I expect to not know things.
A proper lawyer will tell you what they know, and a proper lawyer will tell you what they don't know. And more than once, I told clients back in Minnesota, your matter is not one that I should be handling because I'm not the right attorney for it. I don't have the experience. You should go get better representation from somebody else. And other licensed professionals like doctors will tell you the same thing. That's a measure of them being responsible in their capacity as a licensed professional.
Right. I wouldn't go to a veterinarian to have, open heart surgery. And you made
unless it's a post-apocalyptic movie. Well.
Yeah, but they both use scalpels. I don't understand. I would love to go over the digital You Must Know pocket guide of his. If you have time. Yeah. I don't know how long I have you here for.
No, I'm good to keep going.
Fantastic. Okay, I gotta move it over. There we go. Okay, I don't know if you have it up or can see it or whatever. If you go to DeleteLawz.com and you go to his shop, he'll have this digital You Must Know pocket guide. Also, sometimes he calls it a trifold. It's bad. It's very, very bad. And I'm just super excited to go over it. So I'd like to give my take on it. I don't expect you to know all of these cases off the top of your head by any means. Some of them I skimmed because I've gone through them before. Some of them I did read through last night and today. But our first thing he has here is "Let Me Talk" from Houston versus Hill, 1987. Charge: interrupting cop. Held: a certain amount of expressive disorder is inevitable in a society that's committed to individual freedom and must be protected if that freedom would survive first. Fact: interrupting police is your right given by God. And then he has this like quote of what you should say to the police officer, which is, "Officer, Mr. Hill interrupted police as they were doing their job. I have every right to speak over you if need be." So, a few issues. First of all, if a police officer is talking to you and you're talking over them, you'd be like, no, officer. Yeah, generally they can't really punish you for that. There are situations where they could. But the first issue is that interrupting police is not a right given by God. Statutes, I don't think the United States government, has ever recognized the existence legally of God. I know in the Declaration of Independence, which he often confuses with the Constitution, there's the the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness that are granted by, they don't say God, but they say, I forget exactly what they use.
The creator.
The creator, right, which could be anything.
A creator.
Because the government will not recognize one specific creator. They'll say creator is vague enough to be like, hey, religion, we can't pick one for you. So a right given by God implies a monotheistic religion, which would potentially be unconstitutional under the First Amendment, which is really funny in my mind, because he's like, the Constitution, I know everything about it. Also God. Like, you want to... The whole separation of church and state is not actual law. It's a statement made by one of the founding fathers as to what they wanted, or like by Benjamin Franklin. I don't know who said it. Someone way back in the day.
I think it was Thomas Jefferson.
Said it. Yeah, it's one of them. You're probably right on that. But it's not actual law. It's not entered into anything legally. It's just that, hey, I'm a kind of important guy. I was around. I influenced people. We should have a separation of church and state. I mean, people are also saying the Constitution should be rewritten every 19, 20 years, but that doesn't happen. So that's a weird argument for him to make and try to claim to be a constitutional scholar at the same time.
Yeah, he does claim that case law is cyclical and changes every 60 to 80 years, which there may be some truth to it, but I think his main driving point in that is wanting to overturn Terry v. Ohio.
Yes.
But it'd be really tough to change the Constitution every 20 years. I don't think people understand how difficult it is to even get an amendment made.
Oh boy, it's very difficult.
But it is still possible.
Yeah. It's doable. It's just, it's not supposed to be easy.
Right. Because otherwise we'd have 1,000 amendments by now instead of 27.
And there's the intent to limit federal government to some degree, etc. And then we get into all sorts of weirdness. But regarding... go ahead.
My argument with the Hill case is that he's not really clear on what he means by interrupt. Like in the Hill decision, yes, the people were verbally interrupting the cops, but somebody could very well read this as saying, I have a right to go interrupt this police officer from conducting a traffic stop.
Yes!
And that's going to get you arrested.
You've nailed it. This is exactly... you beat me to it. I'm so excited that you're here. That case didn't even establish that you can interrupt police or yell at police. It established that the Texas statute that was applied was just overbroad. And that if it was less broad, it may have been applicable. But that specific statute was too broad for that. And we know that there are other statutes that have been upheld, not necessarily in the Supreme Court, about interrupting police that would fall under something like obstruction, that are just much more specific. But if a statute is too broad, it can't survive a constitutional challenge generally. And that's what happened here.
And this is another key distinction about the details of a case. It's one thing to say the police arrested a guy for saying fuck you to the police. Mm-hmm. It's another in this case where the town literally passed an ordinance saying you cannot verbally interrupt police. And that's what didn't survive the constitutional challenge. It's not saying that this means you can literally verbally abuse and berate all police officers. It's just saying this particular case didn't uphold itself constitutionally, and
Right.
Chile will take his interpretation of it and just run with it, which leads us to his little pocket trifold guide.
Now, speaking of, basically along those lines, we have Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire, oft-cited. I come across this one all the time, and he says, "Is that a threat?" Is the title of this one. I'll show you guys on the screen. Charge offensive words. Held. Certain words are exempt from First Amendment protection when they instigate violent reactions by listeners, and this would be the fighting word doctrine, which is a thing that is very important in a lot of case law since then. Let's see.
And the ironic thing with this case is that it's a very old one, but what was held is that the guy who accused somebody of being a goddamn fascist and racketeer amounted to fighting words.
Yes.
And so if we take that case just on its face, if I go up to somebody and call them that, does that mean they can punch me right in the face? This case law is saying so. But they also have acknowledged in later decisions that, I think they call it like social, I can't remember the phrase, but it's like social interactions change. So calling somebody a fascist and a racketeer today does not amount to fighting words.
It exactly. So it's the Supreme Court did not stay. I'm getting ahead of myself. He says, the fact you damn fascist or you goddamn racketeer, good call. You nailed it. So you obviously know a thing or two about this one. Are labeled as fighting words by SCOTUS, which is not true, but I'll get to that. And then his quote for the officer is, "I can and will," let me show you guys on the screen, "I can and will use any words or set of words that I feel are appropriate. Fighting words are clearly not the words I'm using." And he fails to use punctuation like a weirdo.
So
that is not accurate.
If he tried to use this argument in a law school paper, his professor would fail him. He's not connecting his point to the conclusion.
You mean when he goes to Yale, this won't fly?
He's saying because the Supreme Court held that fascist and racketeer are fighting words, that means I can say whatever I want to and just assert that what I'm saying isn't fighting words.
Right, because it doesn't have the word fascist or racketeer in it. Yeah,
there's a gap in his logic there that he's not bridging.
Yeah, and the Supreme Court never said, "Oh yeah, no, those are we're gonna make a list, and those are on that list." The Supreme Court ruled that at that time, in that place, in that manner, directed towards those people, it was fighting words, and they were like, "Oh yeah, so I don't know if that was the establishment of the fighting word doctrine, but
I believe that was the first instance.
Boom, perfect.
Where that was used. I could be wrong, but I think that's what it was.
I think that is.
And
yeah.
I always found it ironic that older people tend to call younger people snowflakes, but the further back you go, the more grounds it was to duel somebody for insulting your honor, which just as a premise strikes me as being snowflake-ish.
I mean, how I'm going to kill you over that is a pretty snowflake thing to do. Although there was a lot of dueling I found out recently that was just like they used wax instead of actual bullets so that they could keep doing without killing each other, which I think is very...
so is that like airsoft dueling?
I mean, basically, yeah. Just like, we're not going to kill each other, but it's going to hurt. And then I get the honor. Or maybe don't. I don't know. I say bring it back, though. I say bring back airsoft duels to settle disagreements. Which you actually could do. There's no reason you couldn't do that.
But then that'll devolve into actual duels because the person who gets shot first will be like, "Oh, you missed me." And
good. Like, that's what I want. No.
Be like, "We can't solve this with fake bullets. We're going to use real bullets this time."
Oh, no. I mean, which people already do. And that's wrong. Don't do that. Now, we have no highway parking, which is Tech Lines versus Okay, I got to zoom in on this. Danforth, which is not a Supreme Court case. It never made it out of Missouri. I think it hit the Superior Court. Mississippi is what it was. I'm looking at my notes here. Mississippi. So it's not a Supreme Court case. It's not going to apply outside of Mississippi, which is a really big error on his part, I imagine.
I shouldn't say that they will not apply outside of Mississippi, but if you're trying to build a foundation for your argument, you are using stilts instead of hills when you are arguing for cases outside of your state that you're arguing in. If you're saying I can't find any statute or any cases in Ohio to support my argument, so I'm looking to Nebraska for something that is applicable here, the court's going to be like, did you not find anything in Ohio that supports your argument? And there may be some extenuating circumstances with really rare specific cases where the two sets of facts are the same, but they come from different states that could be applicable. And then you could legitimately argue, Your Honor, this has only ever happened in the state of California, and that's why I have to argue this. But it's few and far between that out-of-state cases actually hold any merit, because the laws are not the same.
Well,
they
this
may
was
be very
based
similar,
off of
but
the actual law in Mississippi. So like I imagine it couldn't be applied to California as easily.
Correct.
There are certain parts of it that maybe, but I'll get to that. So if we look at it, it says the charge was vehicle obstruction. Held, the right of a citizen to travel on a public highway equates to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is something that the Supreme Court has ruled on, is that travel does fall under life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is an 1800s case. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it was not in the original Constitution. So when people say, oh, the right to travel is in the Constitution, it actually isn't, which is really fun, because when sovereign citizens are like, oh, the Supreme Court is bad and they're meaningless, like, bro, the right to travel you're arguing came from the Supreme Court, or it was acknowledged by the Supreme Court. It exists nowhere in this Constitution that you're trying to hold up as the only document for law. I just love that. But he states that fact, travel is also the right to stop on the way for a legit or necessary purpose. This is called an incident to travel, which may or may not be true. I'm not really sure. And his statement for the police is, Danforth ties my right to travel directly to our founding principles. I'll stop/pull over as needed. Which is another statement that doesn't, I see you looking. I see that little side eye like, I don't think so.
I mean, just the conclusion that he draws is so overly broad that, like, if a person stopped in the middle of the freeway, they could say, I'm stopping as needed, but then a semi-truck is crashing behind you because they're veering off the road.
Right.
This is, again, him drawing bad conclusions from specific cases.
Like, his fact kind of checks out per the case. His statement for the police, not really so much. And I have a quote from the case here, which, so I had an example. I'm like, yeah, so you have the right to stop within reason, and it can be regulated within reason. That even is stated in the case. But you don't have the right to stop in the middle of the road, which is the example, was a very similar example to what you said. And the case says, quote, when 20 feet of clearance is impossible, because that's what this was about rules about pulling over the side of the road and where you can do it and how much space it has to be. When 20 feet of clearance is impossible, the vehicle shall turn as far to the right as practical, including sound and safe shoulders, but must not stop upon any part of the traveled highway unless and until at least 200 feet clear view is available in each direction from the point where the stop is made, save when the vehicle is disabled, as provided for under subsection B of whatever statute they're referring to, and say further when on account obstruction or equivalent conditions ahead, it is impossible to proceed so as to leave the 200 feet of clear view, end quote. So the whole case was like, oh yeah, the law that exists right now doesn't, like, they say that you need these conditions to actually stop on the side of these types of roads. But the way the roads in Mississippi are, in what year was this? This was
I think it was 1943.
He has 1987, but I feel like you might be closer, because I remember it. Let's see, Tech Lines v. Danforth is 1943. He has it listed as 1987, so I think he just, which is Houston versus Hill. I think he just took Houston versus Hill. I think he copied and pasted to get the format right on each of these squares and forgot to change the date on it. But
not gonna lie, I saw a video of him looking at his trifold, and like the first case that he reads has a typo in it, and he points that out. So
of course it does.
I'm willing to concede people make typos all the time.
Yeah, it's fair.
But again, the specific language that you quoted, of course, does not fit on a nice little corner of
it does not.
Letter size sheet of paper.
It does not.
But again, those are the specific facts that a court citing this case further down the line is going to look at and say, is the fact pattern in this similar to the case that is being adjudicated right now? And if it's not, they're going to be like, why does this matter?
Absolutely. So, and this was 1940s. So the roads are going to be different in the 1940s than they are today. And basically what it was saying, hey, we have these regulations on when to stop, but the roads aren't really conducive to it. It's a little too much of a limitation. Let's have a little bit less of a limitation, but the limitation can still apply. I think he's trying to use this to establish that police cannot make contact with you for being stopped, which is absolutely not true at all. It maybe he's like, oh, it can't be probable cause. Okay, that might be true, but also not necessarily. But he might be saying it isn't reasonable suspicion, which he also confuses with probable cause all the time, which also isn't true.
Right.
So I don't know what the argument he's trying to make is. I think I know, but none of it makes sense.
What's more is that in most cases, if police see a car stopped on the side of the road, I would imagine they would stop to say, are you okay?
Right.
Is your car stalling or something, so that they can get you going? And I'm sure the auditors will tear me to ribbons for saying that, because they assume that police are out to get them all the time.
But they can, that's a consensual contact. That there's police can, and people say that the police can't do that. They can't talk to you unless. No, they absolutely can. They absolutely can. And they can ask you questions if you're not in their control or you're not detained by them. The custody, that's the word I'm looking for. But there are certain questions they can't compel you to answer, or they can't be like, you need to show me your ID just because. And he has a case that sort of hints at that is the wrong case, which is hilarious. But the next case he has is U.S. versus Williams, revoke consent. The charge distribution, and this one, oh my God, this one's amazing. I think this is my favorite one on this. Held because the subject of a consensual search has control over the search parameters, he can restrict or terminate it entirely. Oh wait, no, this isn't my favorite, but it's still a good one. Fact: to revoke consent to clear a search, you must make a clear, unambiguous position. And his statement for the police is, I revoke the consent to this search and reserve all of my rights in doing so. I do not consent to any searches or seizures, which isn't necessarily wrong.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, it's also not a Supreme Court case. Again, it made it like
right.
the Third Circuit Court of Appeals of Pennsylvania. It might have made it a little bit like there's some stuff about like the Sixth Circuit and the Seventh Circuit may have looked at it in Pennsylvania as well. There was some weird writing that I was just like, I don't know. But
so even if he, and to a degree he's correct about the Fifth Amendment stuff, everybody knows that when the police start interrogating you, you can assert your Fifth Amendment right. But this case, to my knowledge, was just setting out the specific circumstances in which you would need to make an effective assertion of your revocation of consent to.
Because this particular case was the guy gave consent. And when you give consent, like often they'll have you sign a form. They'll explain it to you. You can revoke consent at any time. You can limit the nature and the location of the search. You can do all sorts of stuff. And you sign a piece of paper. A lot of departments will do that now to so that they can counter any challenges to this. Like, oh, I didn't give them consent. Is this not your signature? You initialed after every one of these things, so you knew, right? In that case, the guy, they found I believe they found drugs. They found, I think, a gun. No, that might have been a different one. They found drugs. And they charged him with a possession with the intent to distribute, if I remember correctly. The thing is, he gave consent to search, and the search went on for a while. And eventually, he's like, I think this is taking too long. I don't want this to continue. But he said it at a speaking volume while the officer was too far away to hear him. And he's like, but I revoke consent. And the court's like, yeah, but the officer has to hear that, champ. Sorry. So his statement isn't wrong. It's just the way he's going about it definitely is not accurate. Shockingly.
Right. And I see that as akin to people entering a contract and saying, okay, we verbally agree to this, shake hands, and then one person whispering like, just kidding, I didn't really mean that.
My fingers were crossed. Oh, you didn't see. Yeah, it's a whole thing. His next one, though. Oh, this one I do. I have personal ties to this one. Not really, but sort of to a degree. I'll explain. I smell marijuana. Commonwealth versus Barr, 2021. This one also is not Supreme Court, never made it out of Pennsylvania. And he says, charge illegal firearm. Held marijuana odor alone does not provide a probable cause to search a car. Cops may not search a car solely because it smells like marijuana. Fact, any state that sells marijuana in any capacity means that the smell of marijuana alone does not justify a search or seizure. And then a statement from police is, I've informed you of the holding and the current law. My rights are unequivocal, which is a kind of a dumb thing to say to the police because it has nothing to do with the actual thing that is being said in that case. Now, here in Washington, doing law enforcement on post, we used to be able to pull over anybody for the odor of marijuana or detain them. That was reasonable suspicion, probable cause, etc. Like halfway or at some point during my time on JBLM, JAG, the prosecutor office, was like, hey guys, there's some court cases that came up here in Washington that established that because it's legal here, you can't actually pull people over just for the odor, even though we're on a military base. Civilians can do it off post. We can't establish that the vehicle didn't go off post, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because of recent case law in Washington State, we cannot now use that as solely as evidence for a search. That has to be more than that. So this is a very recent thing. This is Commonwealth versus Barr 2021. Probably in Washington would have been closer to 2018, 19, I'm guessing, when we found out about it. That's just my guess. But he's not entirely wrong. If marijuana is legal in the state in any way, to include recreational or medical, the smell becomes very, very difficult to prove in an illegal capacity. However, in many states, it is still illegal and it is still probable cause.
And 2 points here. One is that, again, because this is Pennsylvania law, like you said, jurisdiction matters. And if this is being argued in one of the southern states that still has more strict marijuana laws, then it certainly may still be used as probable cause for that. But 2, and this is really going to get me called a bootlicker if Chili ever sees this.
Shocking.
If a cop pulls over a car and smells marijuana in it, there's a possibility that the driver is operating under the influence of marijuana, which could still be illegal.
I have
and
that
could be
notes.
reasonable suspicion to conduct further investigation. So
if there's a sole occupant and the odor is very strong and fresh, and there is a difference, and people will be like, no, there isn't. There is a difference between old marijuana and very freshly smoked marijuana. There's more of a bitter, you get more of that smoke in the scent of marijuana. It is noticeable if it's very, very fresh. It's hard. So if this happens to you, definitely challenge the officer as to whether or not they've been to a controlled burn. That might help you. Although in Washington State, we didn't have to do that because we can establish we're in Washington. We know what it smells like. Because otherwise, I don't know if you're familiar with this whole defense, whatever. If an officer says, I smelled marijuana, you get to go, how do you know it was marijuana? And the officer has to go, fresh professionally. Go, oh, did you go to a controlled burn where in a controlled environment they burned a sample of marijuana so you can smell it? No. Then you don't know professionally what marijuana smells like. You have no way of proving that. However, here in Washington, because basically that line of questioning that I'm sure you've seen it before, Paul, a prosecutor or defense attorney or whoever might use, probably a defense attorney, would be like, oh, so were you engaging in illegal activities when you smelled marijuana? Are you hanging out with or associating with people who engage in illegal activities? Is that the correct thing for someone in your position to do on or off duty? No? Cool. You're a bad officer and your testimony should be considered essentially worthless to the jury. However, in Washington State, because it's so common, we don't need to even have that argument. All I have to say is, I live here, and I know people who smoke it legally.
As soon as you cross the border in Washington, it's just a general musk of the air here.
It's just it's pine and weed. That's it's not that bad. But his statement about the marijuana thing is a little iffy. But his next one, you have to answer this. Oh, this one's so great. They're all so good. Fifth Amendment. He cites the Fifth Amendment instead of a case, which is fine. All right. 1789. He doesn't cite. He's just like, yep, that's the date. That's the Bill of Rights. There's the right to remain silent. Held, no person shall be held to answer for a crime or be compelled to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of liberty sans due process of law. Fact. Fifth Amendment, I thought it was essay for a second, applies to more than merely defendants A witness may refuse to answer questions to avoid self-incrimination, and his refusal to use punctuation is really throwing me for a loop. And then his statement to police is, I invoke my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. Fair. Okay. Yeah, that's a good statement.
But this is at the same time him reaching a correct conclusion with the wrong logic. He says, here's what the amendment says, which is correct. And then he just goes right to fact. The Fifth Amendment applies to more than just defendants. Well,
Right.
how are we going to know that without case law to
Everything else has been
specify
case
the
law.
context of what the Fifth Amendment applies to?
And there is case law to establish that.
Yeah.
But he doesn't
so
cite
again, a law professor would be like, dude, where are your citations? F.
Failed. Next one, watch your mouth. Cohen versus California. This one, also a very common one, 1971. The charge, disturbing the peace. Held, Justice Harlan, one man's vulgarity is another man's lyric. Fact, by choosing these words, you get to know the depth of my feelings. Brandy's formula says, free people have access to all materials and all words, which I don't know where that's coming from. And the statement is, the First Amendment allows free speech in all forms. I choose the words I use. My speech is not limited. That is incorrect. The First Amendment does not allow all free speech in all forms. And your speech absolutely can be limited. Time, place, and manner restrictions, Ward versus Rock Against Racism is an excellent one for that I always recommend people read. However, there are some cases that come before that are definitely a good read to sort of build up to it. Hit me with it.
And if Chili had an appreciation for the time, place, and manner restrictions, I'm sure he would not have been arrested in the first place.
Yeah, but of course he doesn't, because that absolutely was a time restriction. That is almost certainly, I say almost certainly because I've been very confusedly wrong about these things before. I'm certain that he's not going to be successful in any challenge if he even gets that far. Now, that case was about someone was wearing a jacket that said F the draft in a courthouse. But, all spelled out and everything. And they were charged with public disturbing the peace is what it was. They're charged with disturbing the peace. And the court ruled that's not enough to be prohibited by the First Amendment. It's not fighting words, it's whatever. But basically what they're saying is that a phrase containing a vulgarity that is not directed at a particular person when displayed as writing is protected under the freedom of speech and is not, doesn't fall under some doctrine that would say, no, this isn't okay. Now, this was under California law as well, but it can and has been applied very broadly. But I understand that when it's spoken, the volume does get taken into account as well. And when it's directed at a person, that's a very different situation. And then, of course, public property, private property, different rules, right? Private property can certainly kick you out. And we've seen airlines kick people out for having swear words on baseball caps.
Right. And interestingly enough, there is actually a case working its way through the court system right now, originating from Ohio.
Oh,
it is
fantastic.
Wood v. Eubanks. And it was a guy who attended an Ohio county fair wearing a "Fuck the Police" t-shirt. And there's a fact pattern about him being unruly with officers, and they claim that's why they escorted him out. But I admit there are dubious allegations in the police's side of the argument. But he was asked to leave, and they eventually physically escorted him out of it. But that is a case that will probably have implications on this ruling. And I think it just got a ruling from the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals because it was a federal motion. So that is one to keep your eye on.
Fantastic. I definitely will. Now, his next case, his favorite, is Terry versus Ohio.
If by favorite you mean this is the bane of his existence,
the only one that he has ever probably actually read and still gets wrong. It's not that hard to get right. You can only read it so many times. It boggles my mind how incorrect about this. Well, because he reads it and goes, "That's not right," because I feel that way. Therefore, I know things. I don't know. It doesn't make sense. But he says, "Charge concealed weapon," which is accurate. Held, a reasonably prudent man would believe you are armed and dangerous and a threat to officer safety. Fact. Temporary detention is not the right to search and seize. It's not accurate. Temporary detention is a seizure. Right? You are being seized. You are not free to go. You are being held there. You're being It is a seizure. It is not the same as an arrest, but it does fall under the Fourth Amendment. It boggles my mind he doesn't get that. Oh, there's a cat. There's a cat,
Sorry,
everyone.
you guys are going to see my cat here.
I'm sure they'll hate that. They'll be very
Yes, if there are
disappointed.
any Artie fans, I too have 2 cats who think that they own me.
Fair.
But for Terry v. Ohio, the issue that I take with him and the arguments that he makes is that he's saying Terry v. Ohio gives police the right to just grab you off the street and put you in handcuffs, and that's not the case.
He doesn't. His videos on this are like police can just do whatever they want because Terry v. Ohio. No, it's not true.
Sorry, I just gotta put you down.
No, it's great.
Oh my gosh, he just gets all up in my face. But with Terry v. Ohio, the case was about a person who this police officer suspected of casing a store to rob. There were extensive facts listed in the ruling about how this guy approached the store window and went back to talk with some people, and then he went back to the store window and back and forth, and the court determined that it was reasonable for the police officer to believe that they were casing the joint to rob it. And so when the police officer approached them, he detained Terry, the subject of the case, patted him down for weapons for officer safety, and found the concealed weapon that was the basis for the weapons charge. Now, Chili likes to say that this means that anytime the police are suspicious of you, they can just grab you and throw you in handcuffs, but the police do still have to have reasonable suspicion. Now, in his mind, and I'm sure all of the other auditors, they think that police are just going to fabricate reasonable suspicion.
No.
But
No.
there have been rulings since then about what can meet that reasonable suspicion standard, because it is a standard just like probable cause is.
You still have to get it right, and it still has to hold up to challenges as to whether or not the facts presented are the reality of the situation.
And this is another issue that I take with Chili, is that he's fear-mongering based on an incorrect legal premise. He's saying the cops can descend on you from nowhere with no warning and put you in handcuffs, but
that's not
the case.
Yeah.
And the Terry v. Ohio argument that he makes is the basis for him saying that all these other Supreme Court cases and laws are unjust and racist and are creating a tyrannical prison state. Which, don't get me wrong, I have issues with the prison industrial complex.
Oh, God, yes. Same.
But him equivocating the Terry case with turning America into a tyrannical state is just nonsensical.
Yeah.
And what's more is that in a lot of his videos, he'll say Terry v. Ohio was unconstitutional. And no, it wasn't.
It doesn't like that. Literally, no.
It literally doesn't work that way.
It says, but it will be overturned. Just wait.
The court looked at the fact pattern and said what the police officer did not violate the Constitution. His acts were constitutional, and therefore this ruling is constitutional. The Supreme Court is what decides what is constitutional or not. So if they say something is, you can't say that's not constitutional just because I don't like the ruling. There are tons of Supreme Court case rulings that people on both sides of the political spectrum agree or disagree with. They just get to say, I don't like that ruling, I think it was a bad one. They don't get to say the Supreme Court saying this was constitutional is also unconstitutional at the same time. It's oxymoronic.
Yeah. And I feel like his however many years of experience pale in comparison to the amount of experience combined from Supreme Court justices. Just a thought. But he does go on to say that under the fact, temporary detention is not the right to search and seize. It is the right to investigate, not to touch me, which is also not true, because in Terry v. Ohio, the officers patted him down and it was found to be a constitutional search, just a pat down, because it's not going into pockets, anything like that. And his statement for the police is, I do not answer questions, which is not Terry v. Ohio, but fair statement to make. I do not consent to any searches or seizures. I am not discussing my day or plans and reserve all rights. Which isn't a bad statement, but the idea that police can't touch you, which is something that he's brought up a lot, is wrong.
I get the sense that he just really is offended at anybody else touching him as kind of like a sensory issue,
That
which
is a thing. I was under the
is
impression it was
fair
like a
for
power
people.
thing,
Yeah.
right? But a sensory thing would be very, I guess that could be used to also explain the headphones. Is maybe it's a sensory thing to help him deal with the sensory sort of audio input, or maybe the feel of something there.
And
I hadn't
I
thought of that.
certainly I certainly don't mean to say I think he's autistic or anything like that, but he
And nothing wrong if
really
he was, but
he really demonstrates offense at the notion that the police are going to touch him.
yeah,
And I understand that that's, it can be jarring to be apprehended in the way that police do, but in terms of a due process argument, he's being subjected to the same treatment that anybody else would if they were in the position that he's put himself in. So he can be offended all he wants. That doesn't mean that the police can't or won't put him through the same arrest procedure that they would anybody else.
right. It doesn't. I mean, for this being his bread and butter, it's incredible how bad he is at it. I just don't get it. But the next one, don't film me. Turner versus Driver, also not a Supreme Court case. The Supreme Court has never ruled on the right to film police, although I believe about half of the United States has confirmed you can do it. And I think maybe there's like one state that's like, oh, you can't under certain circumstances. Most of it's the federal circuit courts or wherever that is ruled, but it's not made to the Supreme Court case or Supreme Court yet. Now, generally, yes, you have a right to film. It's not an unlimited right. You can't like walk into their bathroom stalls and be like, "You're the police, so I can film you." But it's something that is still being addressed, and it does sort of point in the direction that yes, you can film police. And I do encourage filming police with a word of caution, like, "Hey, it may not have made it through court in your area yet." But
right. And with the Chauvin case specifically, part of what was so powerful about the state's case is that they had a young woman, I don't think she was even 18 yet, who filmed the police or filmed Chauvin killing George Floyd. And that was part of what really drove home the prosecution's case in that.
mm-hmm.
So filming the police can certainly be a good thing.
Oh, yeah.
Where I think the auditors take it a step further is that anytime a police officer is conducting an investigation, there could be a degree of privacy that's expected with it.
Yes.
And again, they're going to call me a bootlicker for this, but if you're trying to conduct a sensitive investigation about a CPS case, for example, you don't want people going up and filming the police officer trying to escort a little girl whose parents were malnourishing her off the site of the apprehension.
He's complaining, he's like, why can't I record? Why can't I film? Why can't I do all this in court? Like, because there are sensitive things in court. Filming and recording can change how people interact. And there's actually like Congress actually like has done regular studies on this. You'd be like, hey, yes or no, is this allowed or not? There's an entire thing about that. He's saying, why can't I just get body cam footage immediately? Well, it still has to be processed. If there's personal information, it has to be redacted. It has to be blurred. It has to, like, all these things. He wants this transparency. He doesn't understand the consequences and negative sides of it. How it could be used to hurt people. Because I think he doesn't care about hurting people when it comes to putting out content. As we've already seen, he'll put out whatever information he wants, regardless of who it hurts. Yeah. I think he just can't comprehend that.
He records every phone conversation that he has with everybody, which Ohio is a single party consent recording state. So that's fine here, but it may not be the case elsewhere.
I think California is not. So that's,
and
if he's doing it there.
When I was in Minnesota and dealing with probate and estate cases, some of those were guardianship cases. And you may have instances where parents may no longer be alive to care for children, and there has to be a new guardian appointed for them. Well, now you have a courtroom filled with minor children. You're not going to want that filmed because every credible news organization will blur out the faces of children or require parent consent before they'll actually show them. That's kind of been a universally respected thing, even in the YouTube community.
Yeah.
For
YouTube
most,
can be pretty strict about that.
Right. So that's just one instance where it may not be proper to film police while they're dealing with a family situation involving minors, the court system when it's dealing with cases involving minors. I've dealt with in my current job a lot of child support cases,
Mm-hmm.
and that deals with information about minor children. So a lot of it would be barred from public view if we had people trying to encroach into the hearings, which,
Yeah.
because it's about child support, they never really care.
Right.
But
Well,
there are reasons why some of this material may not be directly shared with the public 24/7.
yeah, just the lack of comprehension. But he goes on. This one's a pretty fun one. He says, held officers lacked probable cause to detain, which is not true. They lacked probable cause to arrest. They had reasonable suspicion to detain, but of course he gets those two things mixed up a lot. Fact, First Amendment principles controlling authority and precedent demonstrate the right to record police does exist. Not in that case. In Turner v. Driver, they specifically stated that there was not a precedent to this. And that's why officers, for some of it, had qualified immunity, but not for the arrest, I believe. So he has it completely wrong. That case specifically, they're like, oh, there isn't. Like, they wouldn't have had anything to go off of in this area for here. There is precedent. There are cases that are certainly younger, but not super young. This is a fairly recent development legally as far as filming police, the ability to film police easily. Then we have, let's see, the statement for police would be, my God-given rights are validated in Turner. Years of case precedent clearly establishing the right of citizens to record police in their official duties. I mean, that depends on where you are, and generally it's going to be a good thing to, like, you're probably going to be on the side of right if you're filming. You're probably going to be okay. But I do caution you to not take that as a blanket statement. As far as Turner v. Driver, he filed... his complaint was on the First Amendment, which didn't really go anywhere. The Fourth Amendment for the detention, which didn't go anywhere. And the Fourth Amendment for the arrest, which the judge was like, yeah, okay, that one we'll give you, because there was no reason for them to actually arrest you. So that's a whole thing on that. I'm trying to get through that. And also the God-given rights. Like, again, stop it. We've got...
Prove God, then prove rights come from God, then make your assertion.
Yeah, and people have tried, and it's really fun reading those cases and be like, oh, the Supreme Court got a little, or the courts in general, it's got a little sassy. Like, all right, where's your evidence? A book?
There was a video hearing where a guy legitimately said, I call Jesus Christ to represent me in court, so any questions you have will have to be directed to him. And the judge had to say, it doesn't work like that.
Prove he's here. I can't see him. I can't.
But to address another argument that a lot of sovereign citizens make about the Ninth Amendment, when you were explaining that Turner's lawsuit said he violated my Fourth Amendment rights based on this, and he violated my Fourth Amendment rights based on this, et cetera, the court's going to hear arguments based on what is being alleged by the parties. Mm-hmm. They're not going to consider, his arguments fail on a Fourth Amendment
if it's not brought up.
Claim. He's not going to say... The court's not going to say, because his arguments fail on these two Fourth Amendment claims, we have to look at the Ninth Amendment claim to make sure that it's not violating that. You have an obligation to bring all of the arguments that you want to assert to the court for them to hear it.
Right.
And so few cases actually involve the Ninth Amendment that it is one of the least litigated amendments, along with the Third Amendment, because it was the last time troops had to be housed in anybody's house.
Recently. All right, next, U.S. versus Carroll, 1925. Oh, this one's.
I assure you, I have no relation to this Carroll, to my knowledge.
Good. So, 1925, charge bootlegging liquor. Held primary reason for a warrantless search is to seize alcohol to stop loss of life or hot pursuit. That is not correct. I'll get into that. Fact, cops can search if they have probable cause you are transporting liquor. That's, yes. If it's illegal, at that time it would have been, because that would have been... prohibition, I do believe, 1925. And then his statement for the police is, the Carroll doctrine is quite clear. The reason you can warrantlessly search my car is to prevent loss of life, hot pursuit, or to seize illegal alcohol. No. This one I know. This one I've been trained on, specifically. Now, in regards, so police can search a car for a whole bunch of things, for a whole bunch of reasons, not just because you have liquor, all right? And this is a law that was being dealt with that does not exist anymore. So there's actually an amendment to the Constitution that does not exist anymore.
And then it earns its own amendment revoking it.
There's an entirely additional one revoking it. Now, automobiles have what's called the automobile exception to Fourth Amendment searches. And that's because they have wheels, ladies and gentlemen. It's because they have wheels and they are transportable. So if police are like, oh, we think there's probable cause that a crime has occurred and there's evidence of that crime in that vehicle, we need to get a warrant to search it. However, while we're getting that warrant, someone could just hook up this car and tow it away. Oh my God. It's like there are exigent circumstances where if someone can take away evidence or destroy evidence, you can do a warrantless search. And because cars are on wheels and are mobile, it is not treated the same way as a house would be. Because the house is not going anywhere unless you're in Russia. It's like Baba Yaga with the old chicken leg thing.
Or an RV.
Or that, right? An RV, I believe, would be treated as a vehicle as well. I don't know if that would be the case, but
I admit I don't know myself.
I should look. That brings up some interesting back and forths. So, but his whole thing, like he's ignoring what the automobile exception is, which is a very established thing that police are absolutely trained on. I got a lot of training on this because it was like, hey, everything you learned about warrants, forget it for vehicles. This is about to get nuts. So the idea, like, you can't search my car unless it's alcohol. No, stop it.
Absolutely. And what's more is that the Terry v. Ohio ruling, he has just a pane up and to the right, literally sets a precedent for what are called Terry stops, where it's reasonable for police to pull a car over for minor traffic violations. That's also a case in and of itself. But then the police can conduct searches of the vehicles for their own safety under additional circumstances. So him trying to use this US v. Carroll as some catch-all for the only reason to search my vehicle is in hot pursuit or to seize illegal alcohol is just ridiculous.
Like, I don't think the hot pursuit doctrine really even applies to searches. It would apply to entering the vehicle to remove someone, maybe. But then you also, like vehicles...
so I should say, if you're in hot pursuit of a vehicle, the person in it is getting arrested once they get caught.
Oh, for sure.
And then it's search incident to a lawful arrest.
Okay, yeah.
So,
right, which is limited to, I think, in that case, anything with that would be accessible by the driver. If I remember my training. So if my search incident to arrest cannot be like the trunk, but it could be center console, like, oh, the driver could have accessed it. What do they have? Why were they running? That sort of thing. And that does get complicated, potentially. I've been out of the game too long to really give a solid analysis on how that would be, and it could very well vary from state to state.
And again, that rests on specific fact patterns. If somebody has an AK-47 that's behind the passenger side seat, like, can the driver access it if they lean back? You know, that's going to be an entirely litigated issue in and of itself.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of searches, you have Open Your Glove Box, U.S. versus Bradley, 2002. Now, this one also, it's never made it out of Oregon. It's based on Oregon law. So this is a fun one. All of them are. Charge, drug distribution. Held, there can be no effective search consent when cops assert it is their independent right to engage in a search. Fact. A closed container or compartment means a container whose contents are not exposed to view, which, like, what irrelevant to what? Right? Like, what does that mean? Where are you trying to go with that? Because yes, you're not entirely wrong, but where are you going?
Right. This is him not connecting his argumentative points to his conclusion again.
Right.
To be fair, when police are in hot pursuit of somebody and they run into a house, for example, if the police follow him into that house because they're lawfully pursuing him and they discover, oh, there's a meth lab in this house, they wouldn't have had a warrant to search the house, but because they're in hot pursuit, they now have reached this point where the meth lab is in plain view in the house, so they can investigate that.
Right. Yeah. Because now
that's one of those exigent circumstances.
Exactly. And then you can do a search relevant to what is actually there, which may require additional warrants, depending. Like, oh, is this meth lab going to blow up? Got to do it quick, sort of thing. That would get complicated, absolutely. Now, this one was about a guy who got pulled over. His vehicle was towed. He said, yeah, do your inventory search, and you search whatever you want. I don't care. He claims, I think, at some point that he decided to stop the search, and the officer's like, I'm still going to do the inventory. But he couldn't get into the glove box. And the glove box, he's like, oh, the glove box is broken. And the guy's like, well, I just don't have a key to it. And the officer eventually, like, pried it open and saw that there was a gun It was like, oh, that's illegal. Like actually forced it open and found drugs. Charged the guy with intent to distribute. The reason why this case is relevant in any way, it really isn't, because it's based entirely on Oregon law, which is that it got the evidence to become inadmissible. He challenged the admissibility of the evidence based on the illegal search, and the court was like, yeah, that was a legal search because, and I quote, the inventory search policy permits, and I quote, there's the quote start, inventory of personal property in locked compartments are allowed only if the keys are available or an unlocking mechanism for such compartment is available within the vehicle, per Portland City Code 14.10.020, Section C. In this case, no working key was available and no unlocking mechanism for the glove box was available inside the defendant's vehicle, end quote. So, because the key isn't present, nobody would be able to get to the contents, and therefore there's no reason to inventory, and the inventory would be a pre-tow inventory to ensure that if anything goes missing, the police can go, it wasn't us, right? But if no one can get into that glove box, we can assume that whoever's at the tow yard, whoever's in the tow truck, is also not going to get access to that the glove box. All the police have to do is notate that they could not enter it, and therefore, if someone does enter it, they are free from liability of it. That's the purpose of the pre-tow inventories, to clear police from liability. It's been determined to be a reasonable search. However, this guy's like, I'm still going to open it, even though I don't actually have the authority to do so. I guess there was some confusion about whether or not he had been given permission to search whatever. It's just that the pretext for the search may not have been clear to the guy who gave approval. And he's trying to make this a nationwide thing when it's literally based on Oregon state law.
Yeah.
Well, not even Oregon state law. Portland police procedures. A city. This is like an ordinance. And he's trying to like distribute this wherever. I hate it so much. But he does say his thing for the police is, I do not consent to any searches. Closed compartments are constitutionally protected. To a degree, sure. Like, tons of things are constitutionally protected. But, I mean, that's not a bad statement to make. It's just that his logic to get there doesn't make sense.
Here's the other thing, too. If somebody is arrested unlawfully or searched unlawfully, they are still arrested and they are still searched. So it may happen and be illegitimate, but court is where that's determined.
Yeah, which is why I and many other people say fight this in court, not on the street, because that's where you're gonna get something out of it.
The worst thing you could do is get into a verbal and then possibly even physical altercation with a cop because you strongly suspect that they're doing something unlawfully.
Right. And because if you're wrong, you're in so much more trouble. And if you're right, it still can be a little iffy, depending on
and
the
what's
situation.
More is that if you get into a physical altercation with the police, they then arrest you for that incident, and you may very well be ruled in favor of on the search incident, but now you also have this additional charge with the altercation.
Yep. It's not necessarily the best option. But our final case, speaking of terrible options, I don't know if it's speaking of terrible options, then I'll let you go and I'll let everyone else go. Oh my God, it's been so great having you here, but I'll thank you after this one, depending on what you say. Just a little joke. Is Arizona versus Johnson, 2009. And he says the charge was weapon possession, which I believe is accurate. Held a lawful roadside stop begins when a vehicle pulled over for a traffic violation. Passengers can be patted down if prudent, which is accurate, per what the case said. Fact, passengers do not have to show their ID, which is not what this case is about at all. Before I get into that, I want to read his statement for the police. Unless there is probable cause that I have committed a crime and you are placing me under arrest, I am not required to provide ID, even in stop and ID states. And there's so much wrong with that. First of all, that is, okay. I've had this argument with people back before I made my channel what it is today. When I was brand new, if I had even started at that point. There was a channel, I think it was called Scam Stingers. Did a lot of sovereign citizen
stuff. I watched a ton of their stuff.
Yeah. And it might not have been Scam Stingers. It might have been a different one, but I know I was watching that channel around that time, and it was either Scam Stingers or Scam Stingers 2. I'm fairly certain. I can't confirm it. Regardless, there was a video of this guy who's like, I'm a passenger, I don't want to give you my ID. And I think it was California. And the officer's like, no, you have to give me your ID. And I think they eventually arrested him or they threatened him with arrest enough that he eventually provided it, which is wrong. He does not have to give ID in California as a passenger. And I said that in the comments, and whoever was running the channel was like, no, you're wrong, California, whatever. I was like, no, California law literally states that. He goes, no, you're wrong. I found it. Like, where did you find it? He cited the entirety of the California traffic code. He goes, this, like, there's 18,000 things there, like literally 18,000 or so. I don't remember the exact number, but like, I'm not exaggerating. I'm like, so which part? He goes, read it. I'm like, I have the thing. I found it. I don't need, and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, stop it. Like, I'm not wrong about this. This is, as a passenger, unless it can be established reasonable suspicion that you're committing a crime, right? Which a mere traffic stop, generally that's not going to be the case unless you have somehow caused the, whatever the infraction was, but like yanking on the wheel or slapping the driver or whatever. You're not also going to be responsible, and therefore you probably won't have to ID absent evidence of some other crime. As far as even in stop and ID states saying that you don't have to show ID unless there's probable cause. No. In a stop and ID states, usually you have to show an ID if there's reasonable suspicion. Again, he does not seem to understand the difference between the two because he hates, Terry v. Ohio, so anything related to that is obviously not worth paying attention to for whatever reason. But this idea that you can't require me to identify myself even if it's a stop and ID state, if you're not placing me under arrest. No. Like Texas, yes, you have to be getting placed under arrest before you can be compelled to identify yourself. But here in Washington, no, for example.
Again,
go,
he's conflating the probable cause with reasonable suspicion.
Yes.
For this case, the basic ruling was that just like a driver may need to be patted down for weapons, a passenger could be too, because they pose just as much danger to the police officer.
That's what this case was about.
As the driver.
Yeah. So it was, oh my God. So I'm so glad you brought that up. So in this case, police stopped the vehicle. There was the driver and at least one passenger. And occupants were detained, and the Supreme Court was like, yeah, pat down could have been conducted on the driver and the passenger. No problem with that. But the officer started asking the passenger questions unrelated to the stop, which transformed it into a separate consensual encounter, for which there was no right to pat down. But they still did the pat down. They found, I believe, a gun and then made arrests. And that was why it was not okay. It had nothing to do with identification. They asked the guy for identification, and he gave identifying information. That was not what this case was about. It had nothing to do with, the right to not identify. It was literally just, you can pat down the passenger, but you can't start a separate consensual encounter and then pat them down, because that consensual encounter is unrelated to the reasonable suspicion of the initial traffic stop, and therefore you can't do a pat down without at least reasonable suspicion. And that's what it was. And he's saying like, this case, it doesn't. There is no Supreme Court case that I found that actually says the passenger does or does not have to identify themselves. There are tons of cases at the state and federal circuit level, for sure. But I've never seen a Supreme Court case, and I looked. So that's it. That's the entire trifold. Every single one of these things had issues, either kind of minor or so enormous that you should take a lighter and just burn it out of it.
Right. So he's either wrong or he reached the right conclusion by the wrong reasoning.
Exactly. You put it better than I did.
And I do just want to point out in that last opinion, if this is just something that I find entertaining, but Ruth Bader Ginsburg was the one who wrote this opinion, and just the thought of her discussing the Crips makes me smile a little bit. Just thinking about her in her robe in her office, typing an opinion that talks about the Crips gang.
Oh, I do love that visual.
Entertaining.
Absolutely. Now, we're going to have to get going because I've held these people long enough, and I'm sure you've got your cats to tend to. First, hi, Gavin1. Thank you so much. It says Ohio gun laws change effective 6/12/22. So we got 2 months before they're effective. That is good to know. I'll look more into that. Thank you. Hank's Corner, super chatted. Thank you. Sorry, I just got distracted because my mouse wheel scrolled too far. Thank you for your super chat. Says, we're discussing wiping the phone on the live stream meet the requirements for conspiracy. No. Because
I wouldn't think so, because and the person was advising him against it.
Yes.
It seemed like.
So if they were agreeing to do it, like, yeah, let's do it, you and me, let's go do it, and then one of those people committed that overt act, then it would be conspiracy. But I think just making the statement to a group of people, no, because he did ask them, should I do it or should I not do it? I don't think it's going to amount to conspiracy, but it does start to get interestingly close to that by asking people, because their involvement could fall under technically some of the elements, but I think it wouldn't be enough to really warrant the manpower required to find these people and prosecute.
And I wouldn't be surprised if when he asked, should I do it, there were a whole bunch of radical people who were like, yeah, F the police, delete the evidence, that sort of stuff.
Because there are some states do have laws about that sort of thing. I forget the wording, like compelling someone to commit a crime or advocating for criminal activity or pressuring someone to do it. There would be specific wording for that. I can't remember off the top of my head. But Mikhailov, good to have you here. Thank you for your donation. Says, in the grand scheme of things, Jose Chile is so unimportant to anyone. He must have an insane level of narcissism. Believe that the government is out for him specifically. That's how it always is with any conspiracy theorist, with anyone. There's so many. I'm not saying that he is like a conspiracy theorist, but he kind of is.
He also really conflates the police's effort to secure his phone for the original video of him committing the crime with thinking that they're trying to get the phone for all of the confidential informants who he claims that he has on there.
No reason to believe that.
And what's more is that even if he did genuinely believe that the police were out for these confidential informant names and tips and things, he was an idiot by making the determination that I'm going to stand here and get arrested protesting my right to be in this government building after it closes and to heck with what everybody else says.
Right.
Normal reporters collecting confidential information would not do that because they're intelligent enough to realize if I get arrested, my phone could get seized.
Mm-hmm. And yet here we are. Commentator Auditor, thank you, says, Chili always says, take me on in a cage without that badge gun. My response would be, okay, you never said I had to lose the taser or pepper spray. A fair point. Although when people do say, let's do it, he does tend to sort of be like, yeah, you know what? No. Palma Calderon, thank you so much.
To give him all the credit in the world that I could possibly give him, at least he's not starting fistfights with people on the street.
Thank God.
But my first statement to him about him saying, I want to take on all these police officers in a cage, whether or not you can beat the crap out of a police officer in a consensual fight has no bearing on whether you're correct in your arguments.
That's exactly. I have on my my bingo cards for Delete Lawz Bingo. I go to the gym and therefore I know things about law or something like that. Or like my exercise, my physical exercise makes me an expert in legal subjects. I forget the wording, but it's nuts that he makes this like, stop it. It's not the same. But Palma says, please watch the video where he got owned by someone who works in the building. He's questioning people in. She called him an idiot. You brought that up.
I did watch that video this morning.
I have not. I'm going to have to go find that.
It was pretty entertaining. And now he's making very suspicious statements. That woman said, I own a business in Ironton, but I don't live in Ironton. And now he's like, we should figure out who this woman is. And it just seems like it's very...
For someone who is so concerned about harassment because of that Facebook post, he is way closer than they ever were.
And what's more is that in one of his videos, talking about all of these motions he tried to pose to Judge Waldo, he said in one video, I put a Facebook post on Judge Waldo's page saying I wanted him to release my phone from the police. And I was like, you can't motion the judge for something over Facebook.
Yeah, it's not gonna fly. It doesn't matter. Cameo Stark, thanks so much. Says, as someone with hypersensitivity to sound and touch, like I have involuntarily hit people because I've been abruptly touched. Chili seems more like a power and image obsessed problem, in my opinion. Fair. Now I don't think we'll ever know for sure, but it sure is fun to speculate reasonably. AZ Jeep Girl, thanks so much, says, plain sight, plain smell, plain hear, all allow a search within reason. Now, within reason is the key word, and he often forgets the word reasonable.
And the auditors and the sovereign citizens in general, every time I hear them say, this violates my Fourth Amendment protection against searches and seizures, they always leave out the word reasonable.
Always leave it out. You nailed it. It frustrates me. But it is fun to be like, no. Reason. End of discussion. But anyway, that's all I got. I got to get going. I'm sure bunch of all of you had to get going. Thank you so much. You've been fantastic. It's been an absolute delight to have this reasonable discussion where I'm not acting a fool in front of my camera the entire time. Only a little bit. Only the parts where I was visible. But it is not. Oh, it's so nice to have someone that I can bounce things off of while doing this stuff. Well, also appearing to know a thing or two. I'm good at faking it. Anything you want to say before we get out of here?
I guess not really. For those who are curious, I do not have a YouTube channel, but I am happy to be the consultant they bring on for these kinds of things.
He is a lawyer. He's not your lawyer. UKPI, thank you so much. I know all laws. I'm Chuck Norris. Love it. Good old Chuck Norris. So, ladies and gentlemen, with that out of the way, I guess until the next time, let me find my mouse real quick. You know how it be. Be good. Stay safe. Somewhere around here is the button to close this.